The main factors contributing to the development of the Harlem Renaissance were African American urban migration. First, there was a movement of blacks to the north cities during World War I. This made places like Harlem new centers where lots of black people were together in one place and were able to have more freedom of expression than they had in the South. Second, the United States in general was getting richer at the time, and there was more of a chance for people to put money and efforts into leisure activities like this. The Harlem Renaissance was the natural end result of wanting to find a place and time where blacks could express themselves and define themselves culturally on their own terms. Once the cultural Renaissance began, it became a magnet for other black artists, poets, musicians, etc., who had long wanted the same thing. It was one of the most artistically productive periods in African American history.
The first stage of the Harlem Renaissance began in the late 1910s. In 1917, three plays premiered for the Negro Theater. These plays, written by white playwright Ridgely Torrance, scripted African American actors conveying complex human emotions and yearnings. The characters spoke out against the stereotypes of the blackface and minstrel show traditions. For literature in 1917, Hubert Harrison founded the Liberty League and The Voice, the first organization and newspaper of the new Negro movement. They both emphasized the arts and had sections in the newspaper where they had book reviews. This new type of literature promoted racial pride and embraced Pan-African sentiment. During the Harlem Renaissance, artists attempted to win control over how their people were represented. By the end of the 1920s, black artists began developing styles related to the black aesthetic traditions of Africa, or to folk art. One type of art was Art Deco, in which flat profile designs of ancient Egyptian art and abstract qualities of spirituals were used. Artist Aaron Douglas mainly used this style. He also used a style of geometrical figure representation. He illustrates black subjects in central roles, evoking the identification of black Americans with the suffering Jesus.
The people involved with the Harlem Renaissance really helped shape the world for African Americans, which gave them the status that they have today. One person that was truly inspirational was a woman named Zora Neale Hurston. Hurston developed a new language and approach to narrative fiction inspired by black folk expressive traditions, most famously and successfully in her novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, 1937. Hurston realized that African Americans did not have the same rights as white people, so the only way she could get her message out was through writing. The more than 1 million African Americans who migrated to the North between 1910 and 1920 found stiff competition from waves of European immigrants and continued to struggle with unemployment. Racism was gaining legitimacy in the decades, which led to Hurston writing her novel. Without the writings of Hurston, blacks may not have the rights that they have today, and racism would not have been improved from the 1920s.
Now be gone. Oh man, don't stop now, we're jumping. Give everything to Lord now. This thing might turn into something.
Another influential person that was involved with the Harlem Renaissance was a man named Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was one of the most important writers and thinkers of the Harlem Renaissance. Hughes' creative genius was influenced by his life in New York City's Harlem, a primarily African American neighborhood. His literary works helped shape American literature and politics. Hughes, like other actives in the Harlem Renaissance, had a strong sense of racial pride. Through his poetry, novels, plays, essays, and children's books, he promoted equality, condemned racism and injustice, and celebrated African American culture, humor, and spirituality. As mentioned above, Hughes wrote many different types of literature. He wrote and created a new literary art form called jazz poetry. One piece of work that Hughes wrote is called The Negro Speaks of Rivers, which provides a solid unity for the African American history. Hughes' poetry covered the issues faced by African Americans with a combination of music, cheerfulness, and culture. Hughes really wanted to get the point across that African Americans truly did suffer in the 1920s. However, he also wanted to mention the creative innovations that African Americans created, such as the blues, spirituals, jazz, and literary work that engaged African American life. Although literature and writing was a very important part of the Harlem Renaissance, another factor was the jazz music. Jazz became wildly popular in the 1920s. It was a form of music that combined African American rhythms, blues, and ragtimes to produce a unique sound. People came out to all the clubs to hear this new music. These nightclubs featured popular jazz musicians such as Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, and singers such as jazz and blues great Bessie Smith. These nightclubs made stars of many African American performers, but only white customers were allowed in the clubs. All the people mentioned, and so many more, dedicated their time in helping African Americans earn the rights they deserved.